listening to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guests. I got to tell you something, people. It's becoming summertime now, and you know what summer means? It means it's cherry time. Now, I'm a guy who loves cherries. That's all I'm going to say. And back here in New Jersey and California, you get produce all the time when I lived out there. Here, you're going to get produce so much. And it's a season. I've been eating them crazy, and I'm going to tell you, they're good for you. So that's my commercial for cherries. Go out and get some. Anyway, we have a great show today. My guest has so much going on. I mean, his group is re-releasing a bunch of albums. He has his group Wang Chung. They did a whole album with an orchestra. He has a solo album, and he's just had an incredible career. And my guest is Jack Hues. How you doing, Jack?
I'm great. Thank you, Steve. How are you doing?
No problem. No problems. No, I'm feeling good. So,
good.
I got to ask you.
What's that? Cherries. It's the same here in the UK. Cherries you get at a certain season, and this is it. And eating the local cherries is just one of the best things.
Oh, because they're so good. The funny is, and I just wish they could come up with one that was pitless, and that would make it perfect.
Yeah. Although there's probably a downside with that. So.
Right. So I want to talk about Wang Chung in the start of your band, but I want to first talk about. I'm not probably even going to pronounce it right. Orchesography. Now,
Orchesography. Yeah.
Now it's such a cool idea because it's funny. I just saw The Who in Philly, and they played in front of an orchestra. How did you come up with this concept, and what was the whole steps to get it done?
Well, we were approached by a company that does this sort of project, where they take the guy running it, John Bryan, is basically a big 80s fan, and he did an album with Flock of Seagulls last year, and he contacted us, and we had a meeting with him. He said, would you be interested in doing a couple of tracks? And Nick and I sort of twisted his arm, and he eventually agreed to do a whole album, And the project was really, obviously he wanted to do the hits, so Dance All Days, Let's Go, and Everybody Have Fun Tonight. But he was also he knew the band, and he knew some of our back catalogue stuff, and so we did some of the more obscure stuff as well. And so we did the whole album, and it's getting great reviews, especially from the fans, who are the most critical, I think, when it's like songs they love being put into another format.
Now, what is it like you listening to it in another format? Because I'm sure your songs have been around for a while. You've heard them on the radio. You've played them live on how you play them. What is it like? Does it give a new freshness to your music when you sit there and you hear this new version?
I think it does. I think it gives it more depth, actually, if that's not too weird a thing to say, Especially, there's a song called Overwhelming Feeling, which is on our most recent album, which back in 2012, called Taser Up. And, we did a sort of, it's a slightly Beatlesy sort of thing, slowish, and certainly the way we did the drums was very much in homage to Ringo, But the new version doesn't have any drums. It's very orchestra-centered. And I think it sort of brings out the sort of depth of the song, really, and To Live and Die in LA as well. We've done a version of it which is a bit more like how we started playing it live, where we play the song sort of at the kind of original tempo, but the last section is much slower. And when that happens on the orchestral version, there's a lot of emotion that comes out of that. And so depth is what I think these orchestral recordings give it.
See, that's awesome, because and To Live and Die in LA, I mean, it's such a great song from such a great movie. But
thank you. Yeah,
now,
that's cool.
When did you get interested in music? Were you a young child, or I talked to so many different musicians. Some get interested as a teen. Sometimes some of them watched, the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. What was your defining moment when you decided that you were interested in music?
Well, when I was 8 years old, I heard "Please Please Me" on the radio. In the kitchen, my mum was doing the washing up, and I sort of can remember it in a strange sort of way, and I sort of sitting at the kitchen table, and then this music came on, and the light just went on for me somehow, and the chorus, that come on, come on, come on, come on, that stuff, and my mum went, oh, come on then, and got sort of irritated with the record, and I kind of thought, great, she doesn't like this, and I really do, and it was this moment of like, this is my world, and this is where I want to be, and then I think pretty soon after that, they did the Royal Variety performance here in the UK. So I got to see them, and from then I just said to my parents, I want a guitar and I want to be like them. My dad was a musician, and I'm very glad that he encouraged me in all of that. So they bought me a guitar, and I had proper sort of classical guitar lessons. And so yeah, from the age of 8, I was pretty fixated on being a musician.
Now, what's the difference for any listeners? What's the difference between, when you say classical guitar lesson and regular? I know there's a different way to play. Classical's just, it's different. But when you get lessons, is it a different style when they teach you classical, and does it prepare you to play rock?
Yeah, I mean, I went to this, she seemed like an old lady to me. She was probably, in her 50s or something, But she basically, classical guitar in a way is about how you hold the instrument, so you sort of put it between your legs, if you know what I mean, and the neck's right up in the air, and there's a certain way to do it. And she never made me do that. She let me have it in the hip, sort of Dylan position, And but I guess the thing was, she taught me how to read music. And that was the cool thing about the lessons, And so by the time I got to the age of 18, when I had to sort of work out what I was going to, because I wanted to go to university, but I wanted to do music, so I decided to do both. And I ended up doing a classical degree, because back in the 70s, there were no jazz courses or rock courses, here in the UK, certainly, And at that time, I knew nothing about classical music in the sense of Mozart and Beethoven and all of that stuff. I didn't know their music. But 3 years at music college and university made me really get into that stuff. And so the classical thing, I guess, really, it opened me up to music with a capital N, if you know what I mean, as opposed to pushing me into a genre, into a sort of ghettoized sense of classical.
So you start playing, and you're getting good, and you become 18, you go to university. When do you just decide you're going to form a band?
Well, I was in bands from the age of 12, so that's when I was at secondary school. That again, I lived in a world of assuming that I would just be like, John Lennon, and then later like Jimi Hendrix. I just thought that's what was going to happen. So I was in bands all that time. I guess the time when I was at university, and getting into classical stuff, I was a little more into being a composer. I suppose that's how I saw myself, But when I left the Royal College of Music, I realised I just didn't know anybody in that world. Music is all about networks, really. Making it in the music business is about knowing people, not in a nepotistic sort of way, but just having bunches of people who are into what you're doing and encouraging you, and you encourage them. So the networks are really important. And I had no networks in the classical world. So I sort of moved back to my hometown and immediately fell into working with bands and stuff like that. And then being a writer, I was always messing up the bands, because they were quite often covers bands, and I'd write songs and they'd be like, oh wow, these are cool, and they play them, and then the band would break up because it just didn't work. And then I met Nick through a Musicians Wanted ad in a paper called The Melody Maker here in the UK. And we sort of hit it off together, and I guess between 1978 and probably 81, we went through various incarnations of different bands, different lineups, and eventually came up with Wang Chung.
Now, when you went through different lineups, you and Nick had a good relationship. Can you tell as a musician, and even now when you play with your quartet, when you're putting that together, can you tell if someone's just not going to sync with you? Is there an instinct in you, or you just know as soon as you start playing, like even back then, saying, you know what, this lineup's just not going to work?
You do. It's very much you sort of read people. That sounds a little contrived. It's a bit deeper than that somehow. But with Nick, we just sort of hit it off. We had very similar musical tastes, similar kind of people that we were listening to. And with the quartet, Sam Bailey, the piano player, we hit it off as well. We get on as people. We're interested in stuff beyond music, similar tastes and stuff like that. And yet there's also contrast. So there are. Like Sam is into sort of the totally weird, out there, improvisatory stuff, and so I learn a lot from him. And similarly, Nick was really into Frank Zappa, for example, who I still have trouble with in a way, but Nick is an absolute super fan,
Now, the original name was Wang Chung. Where did you find that name?
I was reading a book on a German composer called Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. And Karl-Heinz Stockhausen wrote kind of electronic music in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and was a massive influence on me when I was at music college, you know. And if you can sort of look at him on YouTube, his lectures and stuff are still fascinating. His picture is he's one of the characters on the cover of Sergeant Pepper. So he was a big force at the time. You know, when that music was very obscure to a lot of people, he somehow brought it into the mainstream, you know, a super cool guy. So I was reading this book about him, and he talked about Wang Chung, Huangchung, and he defined it as meaning yellow bell. And the yellow bell is this mythical bell that rings at the center of the universe and produces millions of vibrations. And our reality is one of those vibrations. And the job of a musician is to harmonize with that vibration. And that creates a sort of good balance and a good vibe for everybody.
Now, I know in the beginning of your band that you guys didn't use your real name, and you still don't. Why did you do that? Why did everyone choose a different name in the beginning? Was it just something to be different, or, I mean, what?
It's just what everyone was doing, you know. It's, you know, Joe Strummer and Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious, you know, this kind of having these fake names, you know. But in a way, I think because Nick went back to his name, Darren as well, you know, I just stuck with Jack Hues. I don't know why really, but I think for me it was like quite a useful alter ego, you know. I think that being in the rock business and then being successful in it was quite a sort of roller coaster ride, you know. And I think being Jack Hues was quite useful to deal with it all.
Now, where did Jack Hues come from?
Jack Hughes came from a friend of mine, sort of joking about precisely, you know, this, you know, people changing their names, and he was sort of saying, "Oh, Jack Hughes would be funny." Jack Hughes, which is from the French, "I accuse you," and it's a book by Graham Greene actually about some social injustice. And there's been a few books called Jack Hughes, so it's like standing up and fighting for your rights. It's that sort of name, which I kind of liked. You know?
Well, now Wang Chung is together. Your first few albums, how do they do, and were you growing as a writer in that, even though you were young?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there's nothing like experience in the world, criticism, and just playing your songs to audiences to make you develop as a writer, you know. So our first album, Wang Chung, we recorded in the UK, and it kind of did, well, I guess from a what should we say, an objective, cold-hearted point of view, it didn't do very well. It didn't have any hits on it, really. So Arista, who we were signed to at that time, were kind of like debating whether to keep us, but eventually they wanted to do a second album. But at that point, we changed our management, and we started to work with a guy called David Massey. And David had the great insight, I think, to drop Arista and sign directly to an American label, because by that time I'd written Dance All Days, and he just thought that was a great song, but he heard it as a sort of an American hit rather than a UK hit. We can go into what that all means, I guess, you know. But that was the sort of defining moment in our career in many ways. So we signed to Geffen. We thought about changing our name completely, but David Geffen actually advised us to keep the name, but just respell it so that people weren't completely alienated when they looked at it. And so we became Wang Chung, and we made Points on the Curve. And that, with Dance All Days on it, was a much more successful record. But this was in the days of the beginnings of MTV. And so I guess we were a band where we were known by particular songs, as opposed to a band that was known by the album. And so Dance All Days became this sort of iconic single, and the video for it too.
Now, what was it like as an artist to know that a American record label was interested in you, and especially after someone said they think it's more of an American hit? You guys must have been stoked. You must have been happy as all hell.
Incredible, yeah. And I remember coming to LA for the first time, you know, and I mean, I was, you know, from a sort of working class family. I mean, not that we were like poor exactly, you know, but we certainly didn't fly in aeroplanes and stuff, you know. So my flight to LA was one of my first flights, I think, you know, and it was coming to LA was incredible, you know. And the business in America was just so much more pro than it was in the UK. So, which isn't to denigrate the UK. The UK has a certain way of doing things, which is kind of a bit eccentric, I suppose, you know. But the kind of guys that would run a UK record company were, you know, they were guys who went to Oxford or, you know, universities, and they sort of were educated middle class people, you know. But it was a different vibe in America. You know, people really knew the business and treated it seriously, and they would talk about the details of a number one record and who produced it and who wrote it and what other songs those guys had written and where they were born and what bands they'd been in. And it was, everybody had this sort of massive encyclopedic knowledge about the business and were totally committed to it. And that was really thrilling. It was a really professional setup.
Well, now videos were so big back then. And when you did your first video, that play got on MTV, did you notice people started recognizing you guys?
Yeah, in the States especially, yeah. It was interesting, because I lived in the UK, but spent probably a third of the year in LA, But so in the UK, we were pretty, not known, and because we were signed to an American label, we weren't promoted in the UK particularly, So in the UK, I was sort of not so well known, although Dance for Days, I suppose it did go through a phase of that recognition because we were on top of the Pops a couple of times, which was the big show that was in everybody's front rooms in those days. But yeah, in the States, there was a lot of street recognition, and it was exciting,
Now, how did you start touring in the States? When did that happen?
Well, that was pretty much in the deep end. 1984, Dance for Days came out at the beginning of the year, I think, sort of like March, April maybe. And through that summer of 84, we were on tour with the Cars. And the Cars had done Heartbeat City, and Drive was a massive hit, because of Live Aid and all that stuff. So, we were on tour with them, so we were playing to sort of 60, 80,000 people a night in these big megadromes all over the United States. And, I guess I found it sort of stressful, actually, but in a sort of psychological way, I suppose. It wasn't like the day-to-dayness of it was stressful. It was just maybe the expectations or my own expectations, I think back then I loved making the recordings. I loved the sort of peace and serenity of the studio, and this sense back then that with all these new machines, drum machines, Fairlight, synthesizers, that you could make, in inverted commas, the perfect pop record, And I think I found the chaos of touring, where the sound was different every night, and whether you could hear yourself and blah, 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 blah. I think I found that more sort of disturbing, you know what I mean? But that's, one big memory I have is of doing an interview after we've done our set, because we did an opening act kind of set, so we played for 45 minutes, Although because Dance for Days was a big hit, the stadiums were full. It wasn't like everyone was in the bar waiting for the Cars. They were there to see us as well. And I remember doing this interview in a sort of press box, which was halfway back in this kind of football stadium, and it was really the first time that I'd taken in how many people were actually in the audience, because when you're standing on the stage, right at the front, and the super troopers are in your face and stuff, you can see kind of 10, 20 rows back, but you can't really see anything else, and you hear the roar of the crowd, but you don't quite take it all in. But it wasn't until I was in that press box that I thought, God, we're playing to a lot of people here, and it felt very exciting.
Well, around that time, I believe in '85, you were sought out to do to Live and Die in L.A. What is that like for you to write that? First of all, I believe Dance Hall Days is in a scene in that movie when they're at the strip club. There's a small snippet of that song. What was it like for you? Because Friedkin's a big director, and it's Hollywood, man. I mean, were you excited to write that song? Did he give you a guideline on what he wanted you to write?
Yeah. Well, what happened was we were trying to sort of follow up Dance Hall Days with a second, well, technically third, but a second album for Geffen, and it wasn't going well, and we were slightly kind of wondering what to do, because I think, that we spent a bit of time in the studio, but the songs I was writing were a little too complicated, I think, to be thought of as hit songs, I think they were wrong about that, but then I would. And then suddenly, out of the blue, I was visiting this friend of mine in London, and his phone rang in his apartment, because in those days there were no mobiles and stuff, and he picked it up and he said, it's for you. He gave me the phone, and I thought, nobody knows I'm here, and this American lady said, Mr. William Friedkin would like to speak to you in half an hour. Will you still be at this number? I said, yeah. So my friend had to go out and do some work. I think he was teaching somewhere, and I sat in his flat on my own, and then Mr. William Friedkin phoned up, and I had this sort of an hour-long conversation with him, and he talked about this movie he was making, and he talked about how he was using Wait, which is a track on Points on the Curve. He was using Wait as a temp track, so in other words, he would shoot footage brushes back in the evening, he would play that track just randomly to sort of have an atmosphere. And I think he basically got addicted to it and was like, this is what I want the soundtrack to be. So he said to me, I want you and your band, Jack, to go in the studio and record an hour's worth of music just like Wait and just send it to me and I'll cut it into the film. And what I don't want you to do is write a song called To Live and Die in LA. That's not what this is. It's instrumental music, you know. So at that time I was kind of like, great. So Nick and I, which was the band, Nick, me and a drum machine, went in the studio, and Geffen gave us a week. They weren't that keen on us sort of taking time out of trying to write the next hit song. And we spent a week in the studio and produced all this music without seeing the movie, which sounds sort of weird to some people, but that's what we did. And we sent them the music off to Bill. Obviously that took sort of 3 days to get there because, again, it was all FedEx and stuff. You know, you couldn't use the internet to ping things around, you know. And and I got a call from him probably 2 weeks later, and he just said, the music's amazing, I want you and Nick to come out and just see what we've done. And he put us on a flight out to LA, first class, I remember, which is the first time I'd ever been in first class, probably in anything, actually. And we went with him to Todd AO, which was the sort of big soundstage in Hollywood. I think it was on the Paramount lot, actually. Maybe I'm wrong about that, actually. But anyway, watching the opening of To Live and Die in LA was one of the high points of my life, my career. I mean, it was this was before the song opened the movie, so it began with that amazing shot of LA in the sort of twilight, orangey, smoggy dust, you know, with the palm trees blowing in this sort of wind, and that opening thing where the choir comes in and they sort of glissando down and all that stuff. I was just blown away with what I saw, you know. Fantastic thing. And the movie looked great, and we met Willem Dafoe, who at that time was a really young actor. It was really like his first film, and Bill Peterson as well. It was just an incredible experience. And as you say, it was Hollywood. It was the real thing, and it felt like the real thing. And being with Billy, you know, he's the real deal, you know, and you feel great with him.
Now, the movies, people check it out. People start to get, they knew your music, but they're getting to know it more. And then when Mosaic came out, did you know it would just blow up like it did? I mean, that put you everywhere. Everybody, I mean, you know, if you're a musician, so you're around it. But I remember everybody was saying, everybody Wang Chung tonight. I mean, it was one of those things that just, it swept, because I was in college then, it swept a whole group of 20 to 25-year-olds. I mean, did you see that coming?
Well, you know, it was after To Live and Die in LA, you know, Geffen were kind of like, okay, now you need to write a fucking hit song. You know, stop messing around with all this arty stuff, you know. So there was a sense that, you know, this was like make or break, you know. So we piled a lot of intent into making it a record that would be a number one record. And we worked with Peter Wolf, who had produced number one records in the past. You know, it was, I guess you could say, formulaized to an extent. Although I think with Wang Chung, we're incapable of working to formula. So even Everybody Have Fun Tonight, which is certainly a commercial song, has that sort of middle section with like loads of jazzy chords in it, and it has sections in a different key from the main part of the song. So if you bother to sort of really sort of check it out, and I don't suggest you have to, but if you do, you know, there's quite a lot to it going on, you know, and but Everybody Had Fun Tonight, it really did blow up, and we were doing all these, you know, like the Joan Rivers show. I remember having to sing it for the first time on the Joan Rivers show because, you know, in the studio you do it in bits, obviously, and there's that really high note in the central section, and I just never done that live before, and so the band were playing to track, so they were all completely relaxed in the sort of pre-green room thing, you know, and I was really thinking, shit, you know, this is coming up, and singing it live, you know. But fortunately I got through it, you know, I sang it well, and it was all good. But it was a lot of pressure, or it felt like a lot of pressure at the time.
Well, as you're building up on the charts, you're getting bigger. MTV had a big play too, because as I said, I tell, you know, younger people, MTV used to be great. It wasn't all these crappy shows. But who helped you create the different videos? Because you had a cutting edge type video with the jump cuts. Was that your idea, or how did you get to that video?
Well, we worked with Kevin Godley and Lol Cream on it, who were the sort of top directors at the time, you know. And I guess the video that everybody was in love with in that period of time was Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer, you know, and the stop motion thing on it. So we were kind of wanting something like that, and they came up with the idea of sort of filming it in this kind of neutral space and just editing it to shit, basically. Do you know what I mean? You know, to get this, you know, it was an easy video for me to make in the sense that I just had to stand up as still as I possibly could and sing the song into the camera without changing my facial expression or anything. And then I did that 10 times, and obviously through that time you do different things, you know, and by cutting all the different takes together, you get this sort of flickering effect that they achieved. And yeah, I still think it's a super cool video.
Now, you had said, you know, the label said you needed to put an album with hits. How do you go as a writer, go from writing something that, as you said, is artsy to something that has to be more pop? How do you attack that as a writer?
It's difficult, and I've never really mastered the art of that, you know. I know that after we did Everybody Have Fun Tonight, you know, I was put in a room with Diane Warren to write a hit, and I just couldn't get into it, you know. And for me, I just have to sort of write the next thing I'm writing, and quite often that isn't a hit, you know. So it's a tough one. I guess you could look at it that, as in all the arts, really, you know, success is something that comes to you sort of unbidden in a sense, and it's to do with you and your particular persona, you know, but you can't sort of hang on to it somehow. I think as an artist you have to be sort of true to yourself and enjoy it while it's there, and then when it leaves you, you know, then you enjoy that as well.
Now, you're getting bigger. How does that change with your touring and your lifestyle? I mean, getting huge, getting more recognized, and you're a young guy at that point. How does that affect your life?
Well, I guess because of this split of like being, you know, successful in inverted commas in America and yet still being virtually unknown in the UK. You know, and I had a family by then. So in 1984, my daughter Violet was born, and she was the third of my 3 children. So by 1987, when we were doing Everybody Have Fun Tonight, you know, I had a family, and that kept me very grounded, you know. And I think, you know, David was a great manager in the sense that he didn't just let us have the money and, you know, spend it all on a Ferrari or something, you know. He sort of eked it out to us, you know. So my lifestyle didn't change hugely, you know. I never felt like I was wealthy, and I never particularly aspired to be wealthy. You know, I think I was always, you know, I was 8 years old and obsessed with the music, and I was, you know, 32 years old and still obsessed with the music, and I'm now, well, I won't tell you how old I am, but I'm even more obsessed with music. So that's the thing for me, do you know what I mean? The focus has always been music, you know. And maybe the classical training helped, in a sense, to be very focused on music as a thing in itself, you know, rather than as a means to an end.
Now, as a performing artist, performing live, you said how when you opened for the Cars, you noticed how big your the stadium was, and I believe you opened for Tina Turner after Mosaic. What is it like when you're opening, but they knew Dance Hall Days before, but now they know a bunch of your songs? And now they're playing, and they can't wait to hear these songs. How does it feel as an artist? I mean, does that just sit there and go, I've made it pretty much? I mean, how does it feel? It must feel great that people are singing back to you.
Yeah, it does, yeah. I mean, that particular feeling of, like, really getting that people love the music and know the music and it's part of the culture, I got later, you know. I think at the time, I was always sort of feeling, you know, my sights were on the next mountaintop, you know what I mean, rather than the one I was on. And I'm certainly not the sort of person who's going to sit back and go like, hey, I've made it. You know, I don't think I've ever felt that in my life. You know, yeah.
So you guys are doing great, and then you go on a hiatus. What happened there? What was it? Were you guys just tired of being Wang Chung, or how does that work? Because you are on the top of your game.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, with Everybody Have Fun Tonight, that was a big hit. We then followed it up with another album where the pendulum swung back more towards the artsy kind of stuff. And I guess my inclination as a musician is always towards, you know, the Beatles and towards sort of prog rock in a way, you know, which is the sort of late 60s through the mid 70s, So I was listening to bands like Yes and Pink Floyd and Genesis and Led Zeppelin, who I would count as a prog band, rather than a metal band. And so they were the big things for me. So albums to me were, about songs that lasted 10 minutes and all that stuff. So The Warmer Side of Cool, which was the follow-up to Mosaic, had those kind of tracks on it. But I think it was very out of step with the times, because this was the beginning of the rise of grunge in America. And Geffen had in fact signed Guns N' Roses, who were massive, and then they signed Nirvana, So they were right at the heart of the change. And I think Wang Chung, we weren't that, and of course you can't suddenly become, the mentality of someone 10 years younger, effectively the next generation of musicians coming up. So we just didn't sort of have that cutting edge anymore. And it was a natural thing to disband at that time. But I think also Nick and I had reached a point where we wanted to do separate things. We'd really divided at that point. And Nick saw the band as a certain thing, I saw it as something else. So it was a natural point at around about 1990, I would say, for us to split and go our separate ways.
Now, when you split and go your separate ways, you're somewhat starting over, even though you are accomplished. Is it a scary feeling, or and where did you know you wanted? What did you want to do at that point?
Yeah, I guess I never have had a plan B. So it was always plan A, and plan A is to write the next song, in a sense. So that's sort of what I did. I did do a solo record for Columbia, which didn't come out in the end for political reasons rather than a reflection on the material. But again, I think I was writing in this slightly proggy, out of touch kind of way, And then through the 90s, pretty much after that, I got a call from Tony Banks, who's the keyboard player in Genesis, paradoxically, I guess, because they were one of the great prog bands that I adored when I was a kid. And he'd done a solo album and asked if I would come and do the vocals on it and help him write some lyrics and stuff. And the connection with him was that the guy who produced my solo record for Columbia was Nick Davis, and he was doing all the Genesis albums at that time. So I met with Tony, and that was an amazing experience, and did the album with him. That was great. And then Chris Hughes, who had produced Dance All Days, got in touch with me and said, would I come and play some guitar for him on a record he was doing? And the plan was for me to spend a couple of days at his house in Bath doing that, and I ended up staying for about 3 months. I ended up sort of co-producing the record with him. And that experience of being a sort of producer was a big transformation for me, because I think as an artist, I was very narrow in my focus, and I sort of almost didn't listen to a lot of music because I didn't want to get knocked off course. I thought, I know best and I know how this has got to be. But that's a terrible way for an artist to be, really, Working as a producer, I started listening to all the modern stuff, and at that time there was so much great modern music. There was Massive Attack, and there was Bjork and Portishead, and William Orbit was doing amazing stuff, and Tricky, and this sort of like early 90s stuff where hip-hop and a sort of kind of film music inspired approach to music was happening, and it was very exciting, and that was all a big influence on me and helped to move me into the space that I got to in the 2000s, where I started working more in a sort of jazz space.
Now, was it intimidating to you to play with Tony? Because as you said, Genesis, you were a huge Genesis fan. What is it like when, first of all, when he called you must have been like, oh my God, this is amazing. But was it intimidating to you at all? Because this is someone that, you look up to, and of course you want to come across as, cool, or not really cool, but you're talented because he called you. But what goes through your mind when someone calls you that you pretty much have looked up to?
It was a little sort of intimidating, really, and I can remember sort of sitting and listening to the stuff with him, and he's kind of Tony's very meticulous and knows exactly what he wants. There's no kind of shall we try it this way, shall we try it that way. This is what I want. But I guess I'm can be that sort of musician. I can really sing pretty accurately and, you know, get the stuff first take and all that stuff. And that's how Tony likes to work quick, you know. So I think pretty much we sort of got on. And Tony, of course, is very interested in classical music, but he loves all the sort of really romantic stuff, like, you know, Rachmaninoff and Tchaikovsky. And at that time, I used to tease him about it and say, oh, it's all chocolate popsy, syrupy stuff. I mean, you should be listening to Bach and Mozart and proper classical music, you know. And we used to have these sort of arguments about it, you know, but all in good fun and stuff. And I remember taking him to a symphony concert one time to hear some Mozart, because he was always saying Mozart sounds so simple, it's so boring, you know. And I was saying wrong, you know, it's like amazing. So I took him to hear this thing, which he grudgingly accepted was pretty good.
Now, you guys also, you reformed, and I believe in '97. And what brought that about? What was the behind that? I mean, you said you guys had gone each way. You know, you're doing what you wanted to do. But is it just something that you missed each other, or is it because people wanted to see you, or what happened?
Well, I think through that time, you know, if Nick and I were sort of in the room having to make a Wang Chung record, you know, we couldn't agree on anything, you know. But if we just sort of went to the pub together and hung out, we'd have a great time, you know. We were great friends. And Nick at that time was working for record labels in A&R. So he would occasionally call me in and say, can you sort this record out for me? And, you know, come and meet these guys, you know. So we used to sort of hang out together and stuff. But in '97, I think To Live and Die in LA went sort of platinum or something, but Geffen sort of had a little award for us, and they decided they'd like to do a greatest hits album, and they asked us if we would write something new for that album, and that was the track Space Junk that we contributed to that. But '97, was this brief little thing where we came together and worked on a new song, and basically patted ourselves on the back a little bit about Wang Chung, and I remember the guys at Geffen being super nice to us and looking after us. It was great.
Now, you said in the 2000s you got more into the jazz scene, and you do have Jack Hues and the quartet, and you brought an album out a little while ago. Yeah. What gravitated you towards jazz? And once again, where do you start from? Because you have a rock lineage, you have what you've done before. It's like starting over. How do you go about that?
Yeah, it kind of is, actually. You know, jazz is very challenging, you know, for a rock musician. But I think it came during the 90s, you know, when I was working with Chris in particular. And I remember we were working with this band called The Definition of Sound, you know, and we would record during the day, and then in the evenings, a lovely lady called Diana would come in and cook for us, and this was in the days when record companies spent money on making albums, you know. And Chris would put music on to sort of like educate the band, basically, to be patronising about it, but really he was educating me. And one evening he put on Miles Davis's album, Kinda Blue, and it completely blew my mind. And I can't tell you why then, particularly because Peter Wolf in LA had played me some stuff by Miles, and I hadn't really got it. I liked it, but I didn't love it, you know. And Kinda Blue, I just loved it, and I bought a copy of it, and I started listening to what was happening. And I think what I really got about that album is that, you know, with pop records, for want of a better term for them, you know, but you control every parameter, and the way that modern pop records are made, each layer is individually recorded and very manipulatable, and you know, you can get things exactly how you want them. Making a jazz album is much more about letting musicians just play, and especially as a writer, your job is to kind of get out of the way so that they can be great, you know, and that really made a lot of sense to me. And pretty soon after, towards the end of the 90s, I moved out of London and moved to the town I now live in called Canterbury in the UK. And I met Sam because he was giving my daughter Violet piano lessons. And Sam and I would sort of chat after her lesson, and he would talk to me about, you know, all kinds of musicians. And I remember him talking to me about Lamont Young, about what's his name, John Lewis, I think it is, who's the arranger, and Gil Evans and stuff, Andrew Hill, these kind of quite, to me at least, obscure people, you know, and I started listening to them, and it just brought the Miles thing, and I was really into Thelonious Monk as well, just really got into all his music. So it was a particular kind of thing, you know, and when Violet went off to university, I said to Sam, let's keep in touch, you know, come round and have a drink, and he did, but he would sort of play the piano, and we started playing Monk tunes together and just sort of jamming on them. And if you know Thelonious Monk music, I mean, it's complicated music. In a way, it sounds like a child's written it, but when you kind of play it, it's so sort of like jumps around everywhere, And this led, in the end, I guess, to me sort of thinking like, well, I'm going to write stuff myself so I can play it. And I started writing these little tunes for us to play. And once I started that, it just suddenly, all this music came out from sort of nowhere, in a sense. And I wrote all the stuff that became the first quartet album and the second, and writing kind of instrumental, long-form music that has this weird mixture of sort of jazz sensibilities, but also rock stuff in it as well, became the sort of underpinning of the quartet. And the crazy thing is that Canterbury has this whole legacy, in a sense, of bands that were doing that back in the 70s. These bands like Soft Machine and Caravan and Hatfield and the North, sort of prog bands that were really influenced by jazz rather than by classical music, and that had a lot of improvisation and a lot of kind of very eccentric stuff going on in it, So I sort of coming to Canterbury in a sense was, in a strange way, coming home,
Now, you met the piano guy who was teaching your daughter piano lessons. How did you assemble the rest of the band? And I mean, I'm sure jazz musicians have a clique. I'm sure everyone's different. There's rock musicians, rappers, jazz musicians. Were you worried that jazz musicians might think that you were a rocker, not a jazz guy? I mean, how did you go about putting the rest of the quartet together?
Yeah. Well, initially I sort of used local guys, but pretty soon, Sam would get gigs in London, and we started meeting these sort of London jazz players, and basically they're kind of happy to play with anybody. Do you know what I mean? I don't mean that they're sort of slapdash at all, but we were doing something that I think they found interesting. We could pay them, which is another thing jazz musicians like. Rock guys are more used to rehearsing for years and for nothing, I think. But jazz musicians, there's also the whole thing that you just put the music in front of them. That rehearsal's minimal in a sense. But I think, there was a guy who lived in a town reasonably close to me, a guy called Paul Booth, who's a saxophone player, who's like off the scale amazing, But he would come and play with us. In fact, he plays on the recording we released at the beginning of this year, Nobody's Fault But My Own. But he's, to me, a saxophone player who can kind of play at that almost. I mean, I've done gigs with him where he's playing at a sort of Coltrane level for me. Do you know what I mean? He's like absolutely amazing. So you get these guys who are just brilliant. And I think jazz is such a sort of undervalued kind of music. You've got these highly talented players, who are sort of, well, they're certainly not in it for the money. They have to really work at it, just to earn a living. But it's a fascinating area of music.
Now, how did you pick the song "Nobody's Fault But My Own"?
I guess it was a sort of commission that came up. There's a festival in Canterbury every year, and it was a sort of side event in that, really, And they said, can you write something for your band? And this band, Siddhartha, who were like the next generation of sort of Canterbury rock bands, And I knew the guys from Siddhartha because I did a bit of teaching of. I used to teach songwriting at the university, which was really great for a while, and then I didn't enjoy it so much. But anyway, so I knew Joel and Josh McGill, who are the guys that are the foundation of Siddhartha. And so we did this thing. So I had to basically think up something that we could do that didn't require a whole load of rehearsal. And one of the Miles Davis tracks that I adore is his version of David Crosby's song Guinevere. Now you wouldn't think of Miles listening to Crosby, Stills and Nash, but he did apparently. But his approach to Guinevere was to do this like 30-minute improv on just like the opening phrase of the song. Essentially, they never really get much beyond that, and the whole thing is just on a drone with a sort of almost like an Indian sitari type drone going through it, So I thought, well, that will be the model, and then I remembered Nobody's Fault But My Own, which was on Mutations, a Beck's record, which I love, and I particularly love that song. So I just sort of wrote the chart out. It's literally a bit of A4 paper with a very simple structure, and we played it at this concert, and it was great. We really enjoyed it, and then we decided to record it in 2012, which we did. And then Siddhartha kind of went on this whole crazy success curve, where they got signed to a record label in LA, just like I had done all those years before. and they made an album over there, but things didn't sort of go so well ultimately, and so now they're back in Canterbury. So part of the reason why it's taken 5 years to release this track is they just weren't around at that time, but now they're back, and we released it at the beginning of this, I think it was in March, wasn't it? And we've done some gigs in the UK to support it, and they've gone incredibly well, so that's been real fun gigging with them.
Now, what is it like doing the gigs with jazz? Because I'm sure the crowds aren't as big as when you're with Wang Chung. Do you like the intimate place more because you are playing jazz? I mean, it seems jazz is more, to me, jazz is the best. I used to go to a place in Philadelphia. It's back when I smoked cigarettes and people smoked at the bar. You listen to the jazz and you drink your scotch, and it was a great time. Do you think that jazz... What is it like for you playing in smaller clubs, and do you think it's better being more intimate?
Not necessarily better, but I do love it. It's different, and I guess like these gigs we've done recently. I think I'm sort of released in those shows as I bring the sort of rock thing to the party, if you like. So the quartet, as it functioned in these shows we've done recently, is I have a bass player and a drummer who are from a band called Lead Bid, they won the Mercury Prize, which is a sort of prize given to innovative music every year. So they won it a few years ago, and they're a pretty out there free jazz ensemble. So I had Mark in the Ram playing, Sam's playing piano, and I play guitar. Sam is very kind of like free improv as well, but with a sort of classical tinge to it, and then I bring my sort of rock thing to it. And then there's the drummer from Siddhartha and bass player Joel as well. So we've got 2 drummers, 2 bass players. So when people came to see this sort of, in inverted commas, jazz gig, what they actually saw was something more like a kind of prog band. And in Nobody's Fault, I think, is a song that people really get into. They accept that it's an improvisatory situation, but when the tune comes around, it's something to hang on to. It's sort of like readable, So jazz, I think, is still difficult for audiences, and when it's a more pure kind of jazz, then yes, you're locked into that genre, and it is what it is. But what we're doing is very much a hybrid, I think, and it crosses all the different sort of areas of rock and jazz and improvised sort of modern classical music, in a sense. There are those elements in it as well. And I think the way that people consume music these days on Spotify and Pandora and all those things means they're listening to lots of different kinds of music as a matter of course, rather than identifying themselves with just one particular genre. And that means I think people are much more open to an eclectic experience of a musical evening, and so it all kind of works really well. But to answer your question, I'm very happy playing, where I can see the audience and not just the first 20 rows, and I love that kind of that sort of positive feedback from people sort of like having a really new experience,
Now, when we had emailed back and forth, you said you were writing a solo album, which will be a double album, and you said it's much darker stuff. What made you decide to do another solo album, and will you produce that or will you have someone produce that for you?
I did it all myself. When I got the songs to a certain point, I took it into the studio with Joel and Josh played drums on most of the tracks, so we got live drums on it. But yeah, it was a sort of period in my life where things were quite difficult, and I was sort of living on my own for the first time in my life, really. And I just had just all this music came out, and I had the time to devote 24/7 to it, so I was living in this apartment, basically little apartment, and I had all my gear set up in one of the rooms, and I just these songs would come out, I'd record them pretty much immediately, so the songs are about quite sort of dark, sort of painful subjects in a way, but I think that there's a sort of light to it as well, and the stuff I play to people, they sort of love it, so there's a mixture of approaches, there's there's one song that's kind of like a sort of 10-minute journey, there are others that are more focused bits of songwriting. I think one of the things I'm pleased with, a lot of the songs are quite organic, so they don't just have a sort of verse chorus kind of structure, but they sort of develop as they go along, and and some of them work a bit like some of the songs on David Bowie's Black Star album, you know, where you take a couple of lines of lyric and kind of repeat them and develop that musical idea, and then move on to the next section of lyric and develop that. It's more linear in its construction rather than the sort of block structures of conventional pop songs. And we've made a couple of videos as well, like this young director guy who lives down in Margate, which is a town near me. He's done a great job, I think. So it's a very sort of homegrown project, and I deliberately want to keep it that way, keep it working with sort of the musicians that I work with and see every day and stuff, you know. And so it grows out of this sort of Canterbury thing that's going on. But it's a project that's really close to my heart, and I think some of the best songs that I've written in a long time, because everything really comes from somewhere, if you know what I mean. It's not just like crafting songs, they're compellingly going through me. It's this sense of channeling almost that I think you have when you're writing something important, and that's what this album has.
Now, is that somewhat scary that it's like that, because you're really bearing your soul? And it's like anything, you know, when someone writes a book and if people don't like it, you know, if it's personal to them, it hurts them. Is it hard to put something out that you said, you know, came from your heart? You're in a different time, you know, it's dark. Is it hard for you to release that just in case if anyone didn't like it? Would that, like, drive you crazy?
No, I've certainly been around the block enough, you know, to accept that, you know, people have their particular tastes, and I will get that there will be a lot of people who wouldn't particularly like this. You know? No, I think it's a compulsion, you know, to do it, and I think, I feel able to deal with whatever the reaction might be to it, you know, and but I know that I think Wang Chung fans would really get into it, and I think quartet fans would get into it, but I think people who want to have a kind of, because, you know, again, growing up in the late 60s, 70s, you know, concept albums were, you know, people were doing that stuff. And I'm not saying this is a concept album exactly, but the sort of beginning ties up with the end, if you know what I mean. And it's a sort of journey that you go through. There's a sort of structure to the way the songs work together. There are certain themes that keep returning, that link the songs together, and certain musical ideas that keep coming back and stuff. So it's a sort of proper, sort of developed musical journey, if you like. So I think the thing for me is, you know, I kind of love it, and I think other people will love it. You know, as an artist, that has to be your credo in a sense. You know, you do what you love, and if you love it, other people will love it.
Now, will you go and tour with this and play live gigs with this album?
I would love to do that. That's a slightly sort of daunting prospect, you know, because I think it'll be quite challenging to play it in all sorts of ways, you know. But yeah, I would love to do that, and so I can see maybe next year, you know, doing some gigs around this, and whether I would combine it with some Wang Chung stuff as well, I'm not sure. I think next year there may well be some gigs where we do the orchestral stuff as well. So I think this year I want to be my year of releasing everything that's that I want to put out, and next year I'd like to be my year of touring and performance and performing as much of this stuff as I can. Now,
you said also in the email that Wang Chung, it's re-releasing their material in October. How does that happen? Yeah. Did they sit there? Did they have you do newer versions, or how does that come about?
Well, I think it's, you know, the Wang Chung catalogue has never really been remastered and put out coherently on CD, you know, and so it's just something, you know, a bunch of people have said to us, you know, when are you going to do that? And then this guy who's based in New York came to us and said, this is what I do, you know, I do these remasterings, and we'll do a deal with Cherry Red, and we'll do this, and this guy Vinny Vero, his name, he's so great and very meticulous, and the kind of guy who loves kind of wandering around tape archives and finding boxes, dusty boxes, you know, and checking out what they are and all that stuff, you know. So basically he's been instrumental in getting this all together for us, you know. But it's in a sense way overdue, you know. But we're doing it properly. We've researched the tape archives. We've written, Nick and I have both written quite long essays, if you like, about our memories at the time and what we were doing at that time. And Vinny sort of dug out every remix and every outtake of Dancehall Days and Everybody Have Fun you could imagine. So for completists, it's going to be a dream, I think, you know. And for for people who are interested, I think at last there'll be good sounding versions of the songs, of the entire catalogue out there, and it will be in a kind of like a properly curated kind of state.
Now, on your website, wangchung.org, there's a video from Dance All Days, the orchestral version. What is it like shooting a video now, like compared to back being in the day when videos were everything? Is it easier because there's better technology now, or how's the experience for you?
Well, I sort of thought I would never shoot a video again in my life, and yet I shot this video in Prague in December. I shot 2 in Margate in February, and then I shot another one in London for Everybody Have Fun Tonight at the new version in March, I think it was. So within the space of 4 months, I shot 4 videos. And I guess these days it's like, shooting them back in the 80s was a big deal, and it was like making a movie, and they were film cameras, and it was a crew, and it was catering, and it was all the stuff as if you were making a movie. Nowadays it's kind of like not exactly shooting on your iPhone, it certainly wasn't that, but the Dance All Days video, we worked with a great director called Armando, who came with us to Prague, but he just had 2 cameras, the one he was shooting on, which was a sort of like a proper beautiful stills camera, but it did video, and then he had a proper American friend of his who was shooting on a nice quality film camera, but he just did it out of nothing, basically, and I think he did a great job with that Dance All Days video, and we've done this whole orchestral album, and when I listened to the version of Dance All Days that we done, I thought, yeah, it's pretty good. But when I saw the video with it, I thought, no, this is great. It made total sense of the track in the way that a really great video should.
Now, with the 80s being so big, they've made a comeback, which is great because I'm a huge 80s guy. Will you guys go on the road together? Because I went to see an 80s show. Michael Aston had caught me in Philly to see the 80s tour, and Wang Chung was there. And I met Nick after the show, but you weren't there. But will you guys be playing live together again?
I would like to do that, yeah. But I think, I'm happy to play Dance All Days to anybody who wants me to play it to them, But those tours as they stand at the moment tend to be a lot of travelling and a lot of time, basically, to play 3 or 4 songs somewhere, and to me it's not a sort of good use of the time. I did it for a little while, but I don't do it these days so much. But I think if we could get together a tour where we were doing a proper set, which sort of encompassed some of the interesting aspects of the band, and especially if it was geared up to promoting the re-releases, then I'd certainly be up for doing it. So it's not like I'm not into touring, but far from it. I love it, but I would like it to be, where the band can present itself in a sort of full way, if you know what I mean. Rather than just being there to play the hits and then run off and sit and wait for the next gig.
Now, when will your solo album be out?
Well, the plan is to start releasing some tracks in September, October, this side of Christmas sort of thing, and to release it physically, I think in January, February, something like that. Yeah. And I'm going to release it as a sort of vinyl double album and download, so that will be how you can purchase it.
Now, how do you choose what songs you'll release first? Because you said it's very very personal experience. This album too. How do you decide which songs you'll release first? I mean, because it's a double album. That means it's a lot of songs.
That's it. That's right. Yeah, I guess it's a bit arbitrary. The 2 songs that I'm going to we've done the videos for are a couple of the first songs that I wrote on the project. So they, to me, have the sort of power, if you like, of what I've invested in the project in many ways. They're not necessarily the most commercial things, but in this day and age, I'm not sure that releasing I don't know that there's an overtly commercial song on the album. There are certainly songs with lots of hooks in them and stuff, But I think it's about presenting character and integrity and a sort of sense of who you are, and so that's what these songs will establish, and then I'll just see how it develops, really. If there's sort of more interest, wider interest, then we can sort of upscale the whole thing in terms of how we present it, and if it just remains pretty much a local interest thing and just fans of mine, from back in the 80s and stuff, then that's great too. I'm it having to be a big successful outcome, you know. But just the opportunity to get it out there is great.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk today, Jack. I know the website is wangchung.org, but how can people keep up with you for, your release of your new album and just the stuff you're doing and the quartet? How do people keep up with you?
Well, I guess probably right now Twitter is good. So Jack Hues 1 is my Twitter account, so you can follow me on that. Not that much happens at the moment, but there will be a lot happening. And Wang Chung Band, the sort of Facebook account, I quite often put things up on that as well. And certainly all of the sort of cross projects, the jazz project and stuff. You can find out about those projects on that. And ultimately, by September, I'm going to have a jackhughes.com website up and running where you'll be able to see these videos in good quality and stuff.
Well, that's awesome. People, make sure you check Jack out. And also don't forget to, Google Wang Chung. Listen to the music, and look forward to the remaster stuff. So don't forget, it's wangchung.org. Jack 1, or you just Google, when you go into Twitter, just type in Jack Hues, and it's Hues, and it'll take you right to where he is. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Cooper Talk. It's at Cooper Talk. Also, email me, cooper@coopertalk.net. I have over 725 episodes up on there. And check me out on Instagram, Cooper Talk 1. So remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guests. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you guys next time.